thing is up in my face. I'll just do it like that. Well, it'll probably fall out on me. I better let you do it, Bruce. Do it the right way. Yeah, now I can put it back this way. And then tonight, Ray will have it way up here. Yeah, that's fine. I can't help it for fellows like me and you are normal and others abnormal, can you? Good morning. Good morning. It is a wonderful day. It is a beautiful sunny day. And if you were in Alaska, it will be a hot day. But since we're not, it's a really chilly day this morning. But aren't we thankful for chilly days? Because if we didn't have those kind of days, we wouldn't appreciate the warm weather. It is good to see all of you this morning for our Bible class, and we have a space for about 255 more if they come in time. There's Dottie. It's glad she's feeling like getting out today. And who is that over there? I can't see. That's Barbara over there, hiding behind Karen over there. I'm going to ask James to lead us in a song in a moment, one of his choosing. If I were to tell him the one I wanted, he'd say, I don't know it, and then we'd have to take a lot of time to get that one. And then going to ask Wayne if he'd make his way down to the front along with James to lead our prayer for us as we begin our class this morning. And we have a lot of people that need to be on our minds for prayer, and there's a long list in our bulletin. It is too long, but there are people that need our prayers, and especially people that are ill they're critically ill, and we have some on that list that are. I talked it to death. Can you hear me now? Thank you. That microphone went dead. We need to pray for our nation. We really need to pray for our nation, that God, in His kind providence, will work through the hearts of people. See, the Bible teaches that God works through people, and that's all right. I don't need. I got this one on. Oh, okay. That one's off. No, that one's off. I hate to tell you, but it's. I didn't turn it off now. It's just off. But we need to be praying for this country, and we need to be praying for those that are protecting us in this nation. The law enforcement. Yeah, I don't think I've ever lived through a time where as many law officers have been murdered in the streets. And they can call it whatever they want to, but they were murdered. And that is so unsettling. So very unsettling. And we need to pray for our rulers. You say, well, I don't agree with our rulers. The Bible says that we're to render to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. And it also says, 1 Timothy chapter 2 says we're to pray for people that are in positions of authority. And they had a tyrant in authority at that time. And I would have prayed for God to remove him. And he did. He did. James, what's your numbers you got? 756. And then Wayne will come and lead us in prayer. Well, I'll just sit right here. As we announced several weeks ago, Brother Andy Irwin, whom we are the sponsor for the work that Andy does. We support him $1,000 a month. I wish it was a week, but it's just a month. But he recently went to South Africa and was there for, I don't know how long he was there, 3 weeks. And he's going to be coming down soon to make a report on the work that he's doing and what happened there. I don't know whether it will be before February or not. Well, I'm hoping he can come sometime next month. But in February, he'll be going to the Philippines to teach. And what he does is teach. He goes in and teaches preachers about preaching. And he was invited to go to South Africa, and he went to Cape Town, Johannesburg, and one place that I can't pronounce. It doesn't take much to get out of my range of vocabulary, but I can't remember it really what it is. And, but it was amazing, and he told me some other things that happened I think that you'll be thrilled to know about when he comes. I think getting to know your Bible is a good outreach. That's what I do, preaching on the television. But I think from the standpoint of strengthening the Lord's church worldwide, Andy's doing a tremendous work. And I hope that you'll let our elders know that. He's still not gotten over the trip from the standpoint of jet lag, so someone's preaching in his place today. But he's excited, and I think the good that he did will only be known in eternity. He preaches at a little rural church called the Unity Church of Christ, and just outside of Hazel Green, Alabama, on Scott Road. James knows where Scott Road is. I guess you know where Unity is. He went there. They had 8 or 10 members, and now they're considering building on. I don't know that he is. He thinks they need to because they fill up the building every Sunday, and their contribution, they have about 40 to 50 now, and the contribution is probably quadrupled, or I don't know what's beyond that. Steve can tell us what's beyond quadrupling, but they're doing a good work there, and they're helping to support him as much as they are capable of doing at this time, and so that's that. I was watching football though. Anybody ever not watch football during this time of the year? It's almost over, thank goodness. But anyway, we were watching a game the other day, and I don't know whether it was halftime or what, and Peyton Manning was one of the 4 on there to tell us what we saw. You know, they have to tell you what you saw and why you saw it. But this is one statement that Peyton Manning made: old school football still works. I'm not a coach. Now, there's a coach back here, not a football coach necessarily, but Steve's been a coach. Now he's up there trying to coach a whole room, a house full of people up there at our school. But I got to thinking about it. There are a lot of other old school things that work. I just wrote them down as it came to my mind. The Apostle Paul would tell you this morning that old school preaching still works. Old school child rearing still works. Solomon said, train up a child in the way he should go. Old school morals still work. Our nation is rapidly becoming a nation of immorality. Old school marriage still works. That's the foundation of society. The first thing that God did after he created the man is he got him a wife. God did. He didn't even get to pick her out. God picked her out by one of his ribs. And that's where marriage started. Old school marriage still works. But people are trying to destroy it today. And that's something that we better begin teaching. If we're not doing it now, our children, is what the Bible says about marriage. But some people in our country don't live in reality. They live in I don't know how to describe them unless you just say they live in a vacuum. There's no common sense. And they don't believe in the reality of truth. And that's at the bottom of it. They don't believe there's such a thing as truth. And whatever is true to you is true to you only. And whatever is true to them is their truth. And both of you can't be right, but they think that you're wrong and they're right. And we've got to do a lot of teaching today, and I've been wrestling with what I'm going to be taping next month for television. And I've been wrestling, or did I say February? I believe it's February. The lessons that I teach on television that deal with some of those topics. So if you got some suggestions, make them. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 23 and following. By faith Moses, when he was born, was hidden 3 months by his parents because they saw he was a beautiful child and they were not afraid of the king's command. By faith Moses, when he became of age, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he looked to the reward. By faith he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. By faith he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of blood, lest he who destroyed the firstborn should touch them. By faith they passed through the Red Sea as by dry land, whereas the Egyptians attempting to do so were drowned. By faith the walls of Jericho fell down after they were encircled for 7 days. By faith the harlot Rahab did not perish with those who did not believe, when she had received the spies with peace. What more shall I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah, also of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith subdued kingdoms, worked righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, became valiant in battle, turned to flight the armies of the aliens. Women received their dead raised to life again. Others were tortured, not accepting deliverance, that they might obtain a better resurrection. Still others had trial of mockings and scourging, yes, and of chains and imprisonment. They were stoned. They were sawn in two, cut in two. They said, they think that may have happened to Isaiah. Were tempted, were slain with a sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and mountains and dens and caves of the earth. And all of these, having obtained a good testimony through faith, did not receive the promise. They didn't see the fulfillment of it by Christ coming. God having provided something better for us, that they should not be made perfect apart from us. I read those and I wonder, what problems do I have? Absolutely none compared with what all these wonderful people of faith endured. We need saving faith. If you look at the last verse of chapter 10, but we're not of those who draw back to perdition, but of those who believe to the what? Saving of the soul. We need saving faith. We need faith that will save us. Now we have looked at faith that pleases God in verse 6. Without faith it is impossible to please God. We've looked at faith last week that embraces the promises in verses 8 to 22. And today we're going to look at the faith that overcomes the world. How do we overcome the world? Faith. Today, as Christians, we overcome the world by faith. Whatsoever is born of God overcomes the world. And this is the victory that overcomes the world, even our faith. That's in 1 John chapter 5 and verse number 4. And we could spend the rest of our time on that verse, but we want to try to cover as much material as we can. And so first of all, we want to look at the faith of those who were in the Exodus. And when I mean Exodus, I'm talking about those who left the land of Egypt, traveled for 40 years in the wilderness, and eventually entered into what land? The land of promise. There were 3 promises God made to Abraham. One of them was a land promise. And one of them was a covenant that he made of circumcision, and there was the seed promise, that all nations of the earth would be blessed through his seed. Now, the first person we're going to look at today is Moses, and first of all, his parents in verse 23. And Moses' parents did what to him for 90 days? Why did they hide Moses according to the book of Exodus chapter 2? All right, the Egyptians were killing the male boys. And they saw that he was King James, I think, says he was a goodly child. New King James says a beautiful child, which meant that he was good. He was a proper child. And they were not afraid of what the king had commanded them. You go back to Exodus 1:22. And because they were not afraid of the king, they hid Moses for 3 months from the king. And their faith, they had the courage to withstand what the king said. Now, by way of benefit for those who might not be familiar with Moses being hid, did they hide him in a storm cellar? Where did they hide Moses? They made a little basket out of bulrushes or what was growing beside the river there. And there was somebody overseeing his being in where he was hidden, and who was overseeing that? Nope, it's Sister Miriam. And then who came down to take a bath in the river? That'd be the Nile River. Pharaoh's daughter came down to bathe, and she found Moses, and Miriam jumps out. Can't you see Bonnie just jumping out of the bushes? No, I don't know how she came out. But she said, do you need somebody to take care of him? Said, well, I might could find somebody. She said, yes, and I might could find somebody among the Hebrews. So who did she go get to take care of Moses? Moses' mother. And so Moses' mother became his nursemaid. Literally. And so don't you see God's providence in all of that? That God provided a nursemaid, and that he was going to be raised not as an Egyptian, but as a what? As a Hebrew. So then there's the faith of Moses starting in verse 24. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. People are still hiding today, is what Steve was saying, and that's true. And God forbid the time could come that we would have to hide to worship. But God forbid that should happen. As long as we as good people will stand up for what's right, I don't think we'll have that happen to us. Of course, they just passed a law, the Marriage Act, so-called, that makes homosexual and transgender marriages legal. They're not legal with God, but they made them legal with man, and I think the far-reaching effect of that could be that if I were to preach on those topics, say on the television program, and the wrong person hear it, then they could try to shut us down. But you got to use wisdom when you teach things. I usually, if I get on those topics, I say, now we're going to let God do the talking right now. And if you don't like it, you can take it up with God. How can people argue with that? Well, they can, but they shouldn't. Our world needs Jesus more than ever. So he refused to be called Pharaoh's what? the son of Pharaoh, or grandson, had been his grandson. If it was Pharaoh's daughter that found him, so it would have been his grandson. And he chose to suffer affliction with God's people, with his own people. And he says that he esteemed the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures of Egypt. What did Christ have to do with it? The seed promise had been made, and Moses was a part of that promise to carry out that promise. That part of this passage has a long-range look at it, and to the time Christ would come into the world. And he says that he looked to the reward. This passage has been used a lot of times at gatherings of young people to talk about making good decisions. And Moses made a good decision here. And I looked at it. I've got a sermon somewhere that I preached on there, but I don't even remember that. It's somewhere. It wasn't in front of me when I was studying this. But I know three things that a decision can affect the present, what's happening right now. And a decision can affect other people. I have thought many times, and I'm not patting myself on the back. Y'all know that's not my style. I've learned over the years that somebody compliments you, let it go in that ear, go out that one, okay? They just let it go on. That's the advice I was given as a young preacher. V.P. Black told me, keep your feet on the ground and your head out of the clouds. And I've tried to do that, so I do that. But suppose I just walked away from the Lord one day. After preaching 60 years, preaching on television, encouraging preachers as much as I can through the years, and I just walked away. All the people I baptized. I preached a woman's funeral Friday up in Evergreen that I baptized more than 50 years ago. And actually, I baptized 2 people that day because she was 9 months pregnant. And when I mentioned that, her daughter raised her hand in the service. But suppose I just walked away. What effect would that have on other people? It would be devastating. It would be devastating. But he chose to suffer with God's people, and Moses never turned back. See, I could affect other people if I make the wrong choice. And I can also affect my future and the future of other people with one decision. Now, we don't have any teenagers in here. Oh, there's 2 or 3 or 4. Yeah, I see all these. There's one got his hand up back there with a long beard, you know. He's not a teenager anymore. His wife is doing this. He learned about the Lord that's where he learned to make good choices. But here's a teenager on a date. I don't know whether they call it dating anymore. They call it hanging out. We're going to go hang out somewhere. And they might call it something else. I don't know. But anyway, suppose this old boy likes her, and well, if you love me, you just give in to me, and she makes a bad decision. How's that going to affect that girl for the rest of her life? Well, suppose she did. It would affect her life, and don't think that boy's going to marry her. Don't think that for a minute. Don't think he loves her. He wouldn't ask her to do that. But anyway, that can ruin you for the rest of your life. You can go and have a good life, but then there's that baggage you take with you a long, long time. And now, it says he forsook Egypt. Verse 27. We're in Hebrews chapter 11. Jason, if you want to get your telephone out. I knew he didn't have his Bible. Jason's a telephone man. And let me tell you, that boy can play basketball. He can play, and he's got 2 friends. If y'all haven't seen those boys play basketball, when's your next game? The 5th of January? Here, up at Summerdale School, 6 o'clock. probably. You need to go watch. We went the other night. It was the most entertaining night we've had in a long time. Louis said, I think we need to get out more. I said, I've been telling you that. We need to get out a lot more. And I think they've lost how many games? 2 games. Probably not by many points either. He forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king. Who did Moses fear? He feared God. And he kept the Passover, if you look at verse 28, and the sprinkling of blood. When the children of Israel were in Egypt, Pharaoh wouldn't let them leave. And so he brought the 10 plagues. And the last plague was what? Death of firstborn of man and beast. But the God saved his people. He told them to put blood of an animal, a lamb that was without blemish, that is, near perfect animals they could find, and take his blood and put it on the lintel and the doorpost of their houses. And God said, when I see the blood, I'll pass over you. And so he kept that Passover. And as a result of that, the children of Israel were able to leave the land of Egypt. Now, verses 29 and 30, they passed through the Red Sea and walked across. Did they walk across on mud, Ben? Dry land. That's amazing to me. God dried it up with wind. And so that he walked across. There are some findings in the bottom of the Dead Sea that they think, if all of this is authentic, you can't always believe everything you read or even see. But I've seen pictures of where they think they have found chariot wheels and the remains of chariots in the bottom of the Dead Sea, which if it's authenticated, if it's actually true, then that would go to help to prove the Bible story. There's so many archaeological finds, and that would be one of them, that prove the Bible to be true. Now, we're going to talk about Israel. We'll leave Moses, and Israel is in verses 29 and 30. They passed through, that's where we were, passed through the Red Sea. The Egyptians followed them into the Red Sea, and they perished. Now down in verse 30, that by faith they destroyed Jericho. How many times total were God's people told to walk around the city of Jericho? Because you see, they had closed up the city, shut it up. The doors were closed. How many times did they walk around it? Nope. Total time. How many? 13. They were to go once a day for 6 days. That's 6 days. That's 6 times. And then on the 7th day, they were to go walk around the city, how many times? 7 times on the 7th day. And so 7 plus 6 equals 13. 13 times. You talk about a battle strategy. That's not one of them that most commanders would use today, don't think. But can you imagine the people in Jericho watching this go on? And I have an idea they kind of laughed at him, but who had the last laugh? God's people had the last laugh. God had the last laugh. God said, I have given you the city. I've given it to you. But there was something they had to do to get the city, and that is they followed God's command. Now, when on that 7th day, and after the 7th time around the city, what were they to do? Well, what was the signal? Blow the ram's horn, yes, and shout, and then what was going to happen? The wall's going to fall down. That's a pretty loud ram's horn to make walls fall down. They fell down not because of the sound, but they fell down why? Because God said to do it that way. They followed God's command, and when they followed God's command, then they got the results that God said they would receive. They got the city. It seemed foolish. It would seem foolish today, wouldn't it? If we said what the Ukrainians are going to do is start just marching around some of Putin's army over there, and then they're going to wake up dead like they did over in the book of Isaiah and also in 1 Kings, the 20th chapter, I believe it is. And when 185,000 Assyrians woke up dead one morning, they're just going to go out there and march around, going to blow a horn. You talk about making fun of them. The news media would have, they would have a blast making fun of the Ukrainians. But that's not how it happened. God destroyed Jericho, and they were showing faith in God by doing what God told them to do. And then there was Rahab down in verse 31, and where was she a resident of? She was a resident of Jericho. What was her trade? She was a harlot. Today we would refer to her as a prostitute. And but she did what to save her family? I don't know that she knew that it would do it, but what, Ben, did she do that helped her family to be saved from the destruction of Jericho? All right, there had been spies sent in to Jericho to see what's going on, and she hid those spies. And because of that, she became a believer. Read, in your spare time, read James chapter 2. Well, just read about verse 14 to 26, because it talks about Rahab, the harlot, and how she and her family were saved. They did not perish with all the other unbelievers, because what happened caused her to become a believer in God. Now, next in verses 32 to 40, faith in the land of promise. We've talked about the faith of Moses' parents, the faith of Moses, and the faith when they tried to destroy Jericho. That's what took faith. And in verses 32 to 40, this is what we learn happened through faith. Through faith, they subdued kingdoms. When I think of that, I think of Joshua, I think of David. Through faith, they work righteousness. And I think of Samuel as a judge. He was a righteous man. They obtained the promises. And I think of the promise that was given that God would give to the Israelites land. That was called the land promise. And in Joshua chapter 21, verses 43 to 45, as well as 23:14, they received the promise. There are those today that are beating the drum because for Israel, and I'm all for Israel. I'm not against Israel. And because our Lord came through, it was an Israelite. He was a Jew. And how could we ever be against him? And the Bible says in John 4, the salvation is of the Jews. That is, the salvation came through the Jewish nation. Now, but they're beating the drum because they think that God's going to give the Jews today the land over there. They've already gotten it. They received it once, and God's not going to give it to them again. And then they stopped the mouths of lions. Who comes to your mind there? Daniel. And then, of course, Samson and David could come to your mind too. Quench the violence of fire. Who comes to your mind? I hope you remember a sermon I preached on that recently. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Escape the edge of the sword. David escaped the edge of the sword when Saul was trying to kill him. And then Elijah, Jezebel got after Elijah because he had killed 350 prophets of Baal. And he was running away from her. She was going to kill him. Then out of weakness they were made strong. What comes to your mind there? Samson? Hezekiah? Hezekiah was sick nigh unto death. He was told to set your house in order. You're going to die and you're not going to live. And what did he do? Throw up his hands and cry forever? Did he have a hissy? No, he prayed. Our kids used to have hissies. Did yours have hissies? Hissy fits? Okay. I had some too when I was little. When Mama get a hold of them, it was strapped. I've had several of those hissy fits. They didn't just cry up, throw up their hands and quit. No. What did they do? What did Hezekiah do, I mean? He prayed. What happened when he prayed? Anything? God granted him 15 more years of life. Then they became valiant in battle. I think of David and Goliath there. I think of Hezekiah and the 185,000 Assyrians that died in one night. Women received their dead raised to life again. I think about the widow of Zarephath and Elijah, and I think about the Shunammite woman and Elisha. And then the others were tortured. They're tortured. And there's some reference made to the book of 2 Maccabees. That's not in the Bible. There's not a Bible book. It's more of a history of the time between the end of the Old Testament and the beginning of the New Testament. It tells about how the Jews were tortured. Trial of mockings and scourgings and chains in prison. And I think about Jeremiah. Jeremiah was put in a pit because of what he was saying to the king. And I think about Micaiah, because he did not prophesy something good about the king wanted to kill him. And there were those that were stoned to death and cut in two, tempted. Some were slain with a sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, and they were destitute, and they were afflicted, and they were tormented. And why did you say that you don't come to all the services of the church? That's the reason I have said, and I shall say it again, and this is not a broad brush, because there are people that don't come because they cannot, okay? There are physical limitations, and sometimes there are other kinds of limitations over which we have no control. But I've often said that the reason that some don't come is their faith has grown weak. These people had strong faith. That's the reason that chapter 12 opens up by saying we're compassed about with what? Great cloud of, who are those witnesses? These people. And see, reading about these people helps to strengthen, should help to strengthen our faith. And they did not receive the praise of the world, verse 38, but they obtained a good testimony. What does that suggest when it says they obtained a good testimony? People said good stuff about them. There were good things that could be said about them. They did not receive, that is, they did not enjoy benefit from the promises, but they believed in the fulfillment of the long-range promise that Christ was coming into the world. And they came to believe that he was coming. Let me give you an illustration of how that works today. How many of us believe Jesus is coming back? All of us do that. If we believe the Bible, we believe Jesus is coming back. In 2 Peter 3, there was people saying, where's the promise of his coming? Since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were. What does that mean? Well, he promised to come back. He hadn't come back yet. So where's the fulfillment of that promise? We believe it. We believe it out of what? Faith. We believe it because we have out of faith, we believe our Lord's going to come back one day. So we're just like these people were. We're just exactly like they were. And we may never have, and God forbid that we should ever have anything happen to us like happened to them. Well, they lived in a different world from which we live. Completely different world. But we experience some of the same kinds of situations in life that many of them faced. And because of that, we just need to hang on to our faith. And just keep in verse 39 in mind. We're not of those who draw back. Woman's son was playing football, and Somebody says, well, what position does he play? Does he play fullback? Or says, I don't know, I think he's playing drawback. Well, we don't want to be drawback on a football team. We don't want to be a drawback for the Lord either. We're not of those that drawback to perdition. What's perdition? What's that suggest? Destruction or losing your soul, okay? So if you draw back, but we're those who believe to the saving of the soul. Now, if you'll just forget about that chapter division there, verse 11 of 11, he just goes right on to show you how we can believe to the saving our souls, looking to all of these wonderful, wonderful people before us who are men and women of faith. Now, chapter 12 and 13, I don't know when we're going to cover those, because next Sunday we will not have Bible class at 9 o'clock, unless y'all want to drag it out. You don't have any children at home to open. You may have some grandchildren, though. We're going to have a house full of people, maybe. Anyway, we're not having class anyway. We'll be from 10 to 11 next Sunday, 10 to 11. And some churches, I saw some people asking, this is not the Church of Christ, said, we're not going to have worship services Sunday, are we? Because it's Christmas. The only reason that the elders made the decision not to have Bible class is because those teachers, they got those little fellows back there that are wired up like an 8-day alarm clock would drive them up the wall. They wouldn't get much teaching done. They would be like Jason and his buddies out on the basketball field. They'd be wound up and moving. I promise you, you've got to go see those boys play. You got to go see them play. They're amazing. And I've been telling everybody about y'all, Jason. I'm going to call a coach somewhere I know and talk to him about you. God bless y'all and have a great day. Our worship will begin in about 14